An airplane that is capable of firing 65 rounds per second with uranium bullets, which tears open a tank just like a sardine can. The enemy on the ground only hears it after the bullets have already hit because they fly faster than sound. When the pilot pulls the trigger, the plane actually slows down in midair, but then, for what reason did the US Air Force spend 40 years trying to get rid of this plane? Ugly, slow, outdated, designed for a war that never came. Time and again they ordered the whole fleet retired, and time and again Congress blocked it at the last minute. The most recent was just now at the end of 2025. This is the story of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, better known as the Warthog. Welcome to another video from the History in Focus channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like so you never miss a video like this one. Now, let's get to the video.
The A-10 was built for a single task: destroy Soviet tanks pouring through the Fulda Gap in a European war that never happened. When production ended in 1984, the Air Force itself asked to retire every single one. In the same year, the last airplane rolled off the assembly line. For the generals, it was a relic of a war that never came, too slow for the future they imagined for themselves. The problem is that the future did not consult the generals before arriving. The entire airplane was designed around a weapon. The GAU-8 cannon has 7 rotating barrels, is nearly the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, and fires 3,900 rounds per minute. Each projectile is 30 millimeters, with a depleted uranium core denser than lead. The ammunition drum holds 1,174 rounds. The fuselage was built around the cannon, not the other way around. That is how the A-10 Thunderbolt II was born, the only American fighter with the weapon at the center and the airplane constructed around it. The projectile leaves the barrel at more than 3,300 feet per second, 3 times the speed of sound. In practice, the bullet reaches the target before the sound of the shot. Whoever is on the other end hears the cannon only after already being hit by it. At 4,000 feet, the weapon places 80% of its rounds inside a circle of about 40 feet. And around the pilot sits a titanium bathtub built to withstand 23mm projectiles hitting the armor head-on without giving an inch. In 1991, the airplane nobody wanted went to its first war. 132 A-10s were sent to the Gulf, and nobody quite knew what to expect from them. Not the Iraqis, not the American Air Force itself, which had been trying to get rid of the airplane for years. What the world saw was the ugly one, bleeding the enemy in a way the pretty fighters could not. And the war had not even begun to show the worst that awkward airplane was capable of doing in the desert. On February 6, 1991, Captain Bob Swain was flying over Kuwait hunting armored vehicles. He had just destroyed 2 Iraqi tanks with Maverick missiles when he spotted 2 black dots racing across the desert. They were unlike anything he had seen. They raised no dust and moved far too fast over the sand. Swain decided to get closer to see with his own eyes what on earth was moving that fast, that close to the ground down there, without kicking up a single grain of dust. An observation aircraft confirmed it was a helicopter. Swain tried to lock the Sidewinder missile, but the target flew too low for the seeker to track. So he switched to the 30mm cannon, the same weapon built to shred tanks. He fired approximately 75 rounds on the first pass and about 300 on the second. The Bo-105 helicopter came apart in midair, turned into pieces too small to identify afterward. It was the first air-to-air kill in A-10 history, achieved with an anti-tank cannon. At the end of January, Saddam Hussein launched a desperate ground offensive toward Saudi Arabia. An Iraqi armored column of more than 100 vehicles was advancing along a highway from Kuwait, coming from the Republican Guard area. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, supply trucks, all bunched together. American intelligence detected the column and sent the A-10s after it. What happened on that road? One of the pilots later summed up in just 2 words. The A-10s hit the vehicle at the front and the one at the rear first, sealing the entire column in a stretch of road with no way out. Then they worked the line from top to bottom, 1 target at a time, with bombs, missiles, and cannon. The Iraqi crews had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The word the pilot used was turkey shoot. When the planes ran out of ammunition and returned to reload, more than 100 armored vehicles were burning in a single line along the road. February 25, 1991, second day of the ground war. The sky over Kuwait was black with smoke from burning oil wells. Captain Eric Solomonson, callsign Fish, and his 26-year-old wingman, Lieutenant John Marks, took off before dawn. They found a column of Republican Guard tanks with engines running hot in the cold pre-dawn air, and the seekers on the Maverick missiles loved a tank engine running hot like those. 6 tanks died in the first 10 minutes. 6 Mavericks, 6 targets destroyed. 2 more fell to the cannon. Then the pair landed at a forward point, refueled, rearmed, and went up again. And they did it 3 times that same day. As Marks recounted later, that was 16 tanks down before breakfast. The two spent that February 25th taking off, attacking, landing, and taking off again, until there was no ammunition left in either airplane. By the end of the day, the two had destroyed 23 Iraqi tanks, in 24 hours, flying as a pair. Marks shot down 12 of them by himself, and the two only counted what they saw catching fire, or actually exploding. To this day, no air force on the planet has matched that number in a single day. And the 26-year-old lieutenant who helped set the record would appear again in this story, decades later, on the other side of the world, inside the same type of ugly airplane he was flying that morning. The war ended 43 days after it started. In the end, the A-10s were credited with more than 900 Iraqi tanks destroyed, 2,000 combat vehicles, and 1,200 pieces of artillery. There were 8,100 sorties, more than any other aircraft of the coalition. 6 A-10s were lost, and 2 pilots died. The availability rate was 95.7%. The airplane the Air Force wanted to retire had been, by far, the one that flew the most in the entire war. The A-10 was built for a war against the Soviet Union that never came, and it had just won a completely different war, in the desert. You would think that would guarantee its place in the fleet forever. It guaranteed nothing. The Air Force kept wanting the airplane gone as soon as possible, but the Warthog's most frightening reputation was not born in the Gulf. It was born on a snow-covered mountain in Afghanistan, in a place that could not be more different from that desert 11 years later. In the 1990s, with the end of the Cold War and budget cuts, the Air Force went back to pushing the A-10's retirement. The argument had evolved. Multi-role fighters with guided weapons would be the future, and the service needed money for the next projects. Before the case was closed, the airplane went to the Balkans, to Bosnia and Kosovo. Then came September 11th, 2001, and 2 straight decades of ground combat that nobody at the Pentagon had planned even remotely when they cut the budget. March of 2002, Eastern Afghanistan, Operation Anaconda. Before dawn, a Special Forces Chinook helicopter was climbing toward the snowy peak of Takur Ghar, a mountain at 10,469 feet, the highest point in the entire Shahikot Valley. Aboard were a team of Navy SEALs. They were about to land right on top of a fortified al-Qaeda position that nobody knew existed on that frozen, dark summit, waiting in silence in the pre-dawn hours. Heavy machine gun fire raked the helicopter. A rocket hit one of the engines. The Chinook lurched violently, and Petty Officer Neil Roberts was thrown out through the rear ramp, falling backwards about 30 feet into the snow. What began there turned into one of the most catastrophic 17 hours in the history of American special operations. 7 men would die on that mountain before it was all over, and the worst was still to come that morning. The Apaches that came to provide support were torn apart by machine guns and rockets. The AC-130 gunships, monsters of the Afghan night, were deemed too vulnerable to operate in daylight. F-15s and B-52s dropped bombs from above, but bombs do not dig an entrenched fighter out of a cave and bunker, not when friendly troops are sometimes 30 feet from the enemy. A tool was missing for that specific type of fight, and everyone on the radio net knew it. That tool was the A-10. Fast jets and bombers cannot spend hours flying low over the troops and place rounds a few yards from a friendly position without missing. The Warthog could do exactly that. When Afghanistan turned into years of that kind of combat, the A-10 became the most requested aircraft by ground troops. And it was not by a small margin. The Army and the Marines wanted that ugly airplane overhead every single time things got truly desperate on the ground, and the radio started screaming for help. The titanium bathtub around the cockpit withstood 23mm projectiles, the same caliber that brought down so many fast jet pilots in Vietnam. It worked exactly as promised on paper. The airplane flew low enough to tell who was friendly and who was enemy, and it stayed overhead for hours. For more than a decade, the A-10s provided daily close air support over Afghanistan. But the most brutal footage of the airplane was not filmed in those mountains. The A-10's most brutal mission took place in Baghdad, and the one flying it was one of roughly 50 female fighter pilots in the entire United States Air Force, a graduate of the Air Force Academy. Her call sign was Killer Chick. Painted on the inside of the airplane's boarding ladder was a drawing of a chicken with a crosshair over its body. By the end of that April 2003 morning, she would understand exactly why she had been given that name. The pilot was Captain Kim Campbell. April 7, 2003, 4th day of the Battle of Baghdad. Friendly troops from the 3rd Infantry Division were on one side of the Tigris River. The Iraqi Republican Guard was on the other side of the water. Campbell and her flight lead had been sent to hit Iraqi tanks, serving as a command post. On the way to the target, a distress call over the radio completely changed the mission for both pilots before they even reached the assigned target. A ground controller called for help. Friendly troops were under heavy fire and needed immediate support. The controller turned out to be a man from Campbell's own squadron. She dropped the original target and dove over the city. She emptied high explosive rockets on the enemy position, threatening the soldiers, and hit dead center, silencing the resistance. The men on the ground got the first breather they had managed all morning of firefighting in the city. Then, on the last rocket pass, as Campbell was pulling off the target, Something ripped through the rear of the jet. The explosion was massive. The airplane jerked left and pointed its nose at the rooftops of Baghdad in an uncontrolled roll toward the ground. Every warning light in the cockpit was screaming at the same time. The stick went dead in her hand, responding to no command, and below was a hostile city of 11 million people, and 2 seconds for her to decide what to do. Campbell had 2 seconds to choose between two impossible options. Eject straight into a hostile city controlled by the enemy, or save an airplane that no longer wanted to fly. She chose the airplane. She engaged the manual reversion system. A set of steel cables, cranks, and pulleys built for exactly a day like this. Her mind raced to 3 pilots who had already tried the same thing, and one of them had not survived. The Warthog responded slowly. The flight lead pulled to the side to assess the damage and deliver the news. There were hundreds of holes on the right side of the fuselage, and a hole the size of a football through the right stabilizer. Both hydraulic systems were destroyed. One engine was damaged. Campbell flew the broken airplane more than 300 miles, dripping hydraulic fluid and scorched by fire, on manual cable and pulley control. The entire way back to a base in Kuwait, the Air Force manual classified a manual reversion landing as exceptionally demanding. Even so, Campbell landed with all 3 wheels on the runway, without needing to eject. The flight lead said on the radio that she landed a crippled airplane better than he lands a whole one. Some Marine firefighters were on the runway to receive her, looking at her and at the jet. When maintenance went to count the holes in her airplane, they simply stopped counting at 150. The next morning, less than 24 hours after nearly dying over Baghdad, Campbell climbed into another A-10 and flew a search and rescue mission to find another downed pilot, in the same airspace where she had nearly gone down the day before. In her mind, the pilots on alert had been there for her the previous day, and now it was her turn. The airplane she brought back broken never flew again. She did. She was back in the air the very next day, as if none of it had happened. And it was not the cannon or the bombs that gave the A-10 its true reputation in Afghanistan. It was the sound. Anyone who fought there and heard the radio tells the same story about the airplane. It is the noise, a deep, low thunder you feel in your chest before the ear registers it. The cannon does not fire rounds the ear can separate. It fires too fast for that. The cannon fires 65 rounds per second, and the projectiles arrive before the sound of the weapon. When the enemy in the open field hears the noise, the impacts are already happening. There is no time to duck and run. The first warning is also the last. For American troops, that sound meant the cavalry had finally arrived. For the enemy on the other side, it meant he was already dead and had not quite realized it yet, because the rounds arrived well before the sound of the gun. December 2nd, 2010, departing Kandahar Air Base. Major John Tice, who had been an Army engineer before becoming a pilot, was flying with another A-10, providing cover for 2 Special Forces teams protecting engineers building a bridge in the Helmand River Valley. The region was full of Taliban fighters. When the Taliban ambushed the troops with rockets, heavy machine guns, and rifle fire, Tice turned the airplane toward the enemy positions and went to work. Tice dove into small arms range without regard for his own safety. He made 6 low-altitude passes against 4 different Taliban positions, expending 1,140 cannon rounds in one go. He eliminated 32 enemy fighters and saved the lives of 75 Americans on the ground. 0 friendly casualties. A single mission, a single pilot. In an airplane the Pentagon already wanted to send to the aircraft boneyard rusting in the Arizona desert. April 23rd, 2011, 4 in the morning. 2 pararescue men, Sergeants Zachary Klein and Bill Senna, descended to a downed American helicopter in Kapisa province. One of the Army pilots was dead and the other wounded. While preparing to recover the body, the 2 became pinned under heavy machine gun fire and could not get back to their own helicopters. All of this just yards from the enemy, with no reinforcements in sight. Captain Mike Hilkert, call sign Vago, was supporting another unit when the call came over the emergency frequency. In a combat zone, using that frequency is the last resort, a sign that things are very bad indeed. Fueled by energy drinks and flying an airplane identified as Hog 73, Hilkert assembled 3 A-10s in a formation called Sandy 1, the call sign used since Vietnam for aircraft supporting rescue missions, and took over the entire airspace of that fight. For the next 6 hours, Hilkert single-handedly ran what was essentially an entire operation. He coordinated 21 different aircraft across 37 separate radio frequencies: A-10s, Apaches, rescue helicopters, observation aircraft, and aerial refueling tankers. All of it in the dark, in the middle of a firefight with dozens of friendly soldiers about to be overrun on the ground. And he had already been inside that cramped cockpit for nearly 10 hours, exhausted. Half an hour after the A-10s arrived, the enemy pinned Klein and Senna down again with close-range machine gun fire. Hilkert was in the middle of aerial refueling, a maneuver that by itself demands absolute concentration from any pilot. Even so, he found the threat and marked the target just 160 feet from the two pararescue men. The wingman opened fire with the cannon and saved both of them. He was refueling and aiming at a target 160 feet from friendlies at the exact same time without stopping. A quick reaction force of 32 soldiers landed and walked into a second ambush. One soldier killed, several wounded. The rescue helicopters were taking fire from every direction while trying to evacuate the wounded. Then, Hilkert did something the official citation records in detail. He flew his own airplane, weighing more than 12 tons, between the helicopters and the enemy machine guns on purpose, repeatedly, to draw the enemy fire away from the rescue helicopters. Throughout that fight, Hilkert saw with his own eyes 9 surface-to-air missiles fired at his jet. 9. He flew through all of them and kept working without stopping. By dawn, the tally was 2 landing zones secured, both pararescue men rescued, the dead pilot recovered, and the 32 soldiers of the Quick Reaction Force extracted. More than 30 American lives saved in a single 6-hour mission in the Afghan dark, before the sun rose over the mountain. Hilkert only received the Distinguished Flying Cross 10 years after that night, in 2021. When asked about the ceremony, his answer was short and dry. Several people lost their lives that day, he said. It was not all celebration when they got back. They flew back to Kandahar in silence. That is exactly what a Warthog pilot sounds like, talking about his most important decoration, with no desire whatsoever to turn it into a party. 3 years later, the most experienced pilot who ever flew the A-10 entered a similar fight. His name is John Marks, callsign Carl, the same lieutenant who knocked out 12 of those 23 tanks in the Gulf in 1991. By 2014, he had more than 7,000 hours in the airplane, 13 combat deployments, and 358 combat sorties under his belt. When a man like that says a mission was difficult, the entire A-10 community goes quiet and listens to every word he says. That night, Marks's radio received a call from a special forces team in the Kunar Valley, the deadliest pocket of the entire Afghan war, the same valley that swallowed Operation Red Wings in 2005. Told in the film Lone Survivor. The team's call sign was Jaguar 20. They were nearly surrounded, with the Taliban closing from 3 sides, and without enough ammunition to shoot their way out and escape alive from the encirclement closing in the dark. Marks said afterward that he needed every skill he had ever learned as an A-10 pilot that night. The sky over the valley turned into a coordination nightmare. F-16s, AC-130 gunships, Apaches, and small helicopters, all converging on the same narrow slice of tight sky. Marks ended up doing 3 jobs at once. He was flying his own strafing passes, controlling the air traffic over the valley, and clearing every weapons release near the friendly troops, all at the same time, alone in the cockpit. Marks's wingman said he spent the entire mission just trying to keep up with the lead, with no idea how the other man managed to track all of it at the same time. At the end of that night, every American operator on the ground got out alive. Every one of the Afghan soldiers got out alive too. The only casualties were minor. Marks considers the Jaguar 20 mission tied with the 23 tanks of the Gulf as the highest point of his entire career, tied with that day in 1991 in the desert. When Marks retired from the Air Force, decades after all of it, he did not talk about the tanks. They asked what he was most proud of in his entire career. He said the biggest fans of the A-10 are the guys on the ground who say this thing saved their lives. That is the pride of flying this airplane, he answered. The pilot who destroyed more armored vehicles than any other in the post-Vietnam era summed it all up in the ordinary man he protected down below, not in the tally of vehicles he destroyed. August of 2019, an urban area of Afghanistan the Air Force never publicly named, a fight that was bad even by Afghan war standards. The enemy was inside the buildings, friendly troops were inside the same buildings, grenades were being traded through the windows. 2 ground controllers were calling targets at the same time, on different frequencies, sometimes just yards apart on the map, in the middle of crossfire inside the city. The pilot was Major Kyle Atkinson, callsign Metric, of the 53rd Wing, based at Nellis in Nevada. For hours, he worked both ground controllers on separate frequencies at the same time. He controlled who entered and exited the airspace. He coordinated Apache helicopter attacks in 3 different sectors, and he placed 30mm cannon rounds 16 feet from friendly soldiers. 16 feet. The width of a small room, with friendlies and enemies on both sides of the line. It is worth understanding what that truly means in real practice. The A-10's cannon is accurate enough to hit inside a 40-foot circle at about 3/4 of a mile. Atkinson was placing rounds inside a circle smaller than that. Friendlies on one side of the line, Taliban on the other, both moving, both shooting in tight urban terrain. Missing low meant friendly fire. And he simply did not miss a single time that entire afternoon of close-quarters combat. Atkinson broke up a surprise grenade attack, stopped what the official release called an enemy assault, and saved every coalition soldier in that urban fight. When asked about it afterward, he said something that deserved to be carved into a wall. You do not have to go far in the A-10 community to find someone with a similar story, and most of them never received any recognition at all. Not a medal, not a single line in a press release. In 2018, the Warthog was back in Kandahar full-time. 12 A-10s landed in January of that year, the first A-10s in Afghanistan in 3 full years. 5 days later, one of them caught a Taliban truck fleeing the scene of an attack in Kandahar province. The truck was racing across the flat desert, kicking up a long trail of dust behind it. The cannon opened fire for less than 2 full seconds, right on top of that truck fleeing through the desert. The dust trail simply ended in the middle of nowhere. There was no more truck. There were no more fighters. There was a smear of dark debris and an expanding cloud where a living target had been running moments before. The American Department of Defense released the footage on its own without needing to exaggerate anything. And that is why the Taliban radio of that period was constantly full of calls to break contact and disappear before the sound of the airplane even reached them out in the desert. On a night that same year, Marks and his wingman tracked an entire unit of elite Taliban fighters, the so-called Red Unit, in the total darkness of the pre-dawn hours. They identified the entire force while seeing almost nothing and eliminated every one of them in a single coordinated sequence. There was not a single survivor. The Red Unit ceased to exist as an organization that night. It was exactly for this kind of dirty work that the airplane had been built back in the 1970s. Here's the part that almost no civilian knows properly. While the troops on the ground revered the airplane, the United States Air Force spent most of its career trying to retire it. The service's logic was simple. The A-10 was old, slow, and too specialized for a future war against a heavyweight adversary like Russia or China. The money should go to the new fighters. But there was one detail the Air Force budget slides never managed to answer properly. That detail was precisely what the A-10 did that nothing else in the American inventory did the same way. The F-35 cannot spend hours flying low over the troops. It cannot take small arms fire and limp home. Its cannon carries 182 rounds, about 3 seconds of fire total. The A-10's drum holds 1,174. When a soldier is pinned in a riverbed with the enemy on the high ground, he does not want a stealth fighter at 30,000 feet. He wants the ugly thunder flying low right over him. In 2014, in the middle of the air war against the Islamic State, the Air Force made its most aggressive attempt yet. It proposed retiring the entire A-10 fleet to save approximately $3.5 billion over 5 years, and redirecting the money and maintenance personnel to the F-35. Congress blocked it. The fight was the same as always, but this time there was a real war happening while the airplane was headed for the chopping block, with American troops depending on it on the ground at that very moment. The decisive factor was not jobs in congressional districts, although that weighed in too. It was the testimony of combat veterans and Army and Marine officers who told lawmakers, without mincing words, that no other aircraft did what the A-10 did. In 2015, the service tried again, a phased reduction. Congress blocked it once more and wrote into law a minimum floor of aircraft. A number of the Air Force had no permission whatsoever to go below. While the Pentagon was signing the airplane's death warrant on paper, the airplane was over a city in Syria. Kobani sits right on the Turkish border in northern Syria, a majority Kurdish city surrounded on 3 sides by Islamic State territory. In the summer of 2014, the group had swept through Iraq and Syria, beheading prisoners on camera and parading captured American military equipment through the streets of Mosul, Iraq, for the whole world to see on television. The Islamic State had improvised armor, captured Humvees, heavy machine guns, mortars, and an estimated 2,000 fighters massing for the assault on Kobani. Inside the city, the lightly armed Kurdish defenders were running out of ammunition and falling back. There was no fortified base and no safe zone anywhere. Just people entrenched in buildings and destroyed streets trying to hold the line against an enemy that had already taken cities 10 times larger. This was not a tank battle in the open desert, as Khafji had been in 1991. It was point-blank urban combat. Islamic State fighters were inside the buildings, sometimes yards from the people defending those same buildings. American air power had been hammering the group's targets in the area for weeks, but Kobani was different. Hitting the wrong window with a bomb killed exactly the civilians and defenders you were trying to save with that strike. Then a familiar growl appeared over the burning rooftops of the city. A single A-10 announced its presence on the radio. The ground controller, pinned down alongside the Kurds, watching the enemy advance through doorways just yards from his own position, began passing targets. Bombs were too dangerous there. There was only one weapon precise enough to use, that close to friendlies. The pilot aimed the airplane straight down the street, between the buildings, and descended hard on top of the enemy. The first burst tore through a column of Islamic State fighters in their improvised armor as they advanced against the Kurdish line. The pilot pulled up, banked around, came back. The enemy adapted, broke into smaller groups. The Warthog adjusted, came lower and faster. The cannon walked the rounds down the street with surgical precision, keeping the friendly Kurdish line clear just yards away without ever touching it. Walls collapsed. Cover vanished from under the enemy's feet. Coordinated assaults fell apart before they truly began. Tracer rounds from machine guns climbed from the rooftops, and the airplane took several hits to the body. All systems stayed green. The fuel, however, was burning fast. A relief A-10 was minutes away. But minutes mattered. If that pilot left at that moment, the entire city could fall in the short gap before the next airplane arrived to take over. So he stayed beyond minimum return fuel and dove one more time, breaking up a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed the Kurdish defenders. When the next Warthog finally checked in on the radio, the handoff was almost casual. Targets, friendlies, danger areas in one sentence. They are counting on you. For 4 months, the A-10s and other coalition aircraft kept the Islamic State pinned at the edge of Kobani, never letting the group finish swallowing the city. Estimates of enemies killed inside the city reached the thousands over those months of siege. When the Islamic State finally pulled back in January of 2015, Kobani had shown the entire world that the group could be stopped. The Islamic State could not hold, and the old A-10 still had plenty of work left ahead. And the airplane that turned the tide there was the exact same one the Pentagon had been trying to retire for more than an entire decade. While the budget said the A-10 was a relic of an old war, the A-10 was holding an entire city in a new war. Congress had blocked the cut once again, and the Warthog had not finished appearing in brutal combat footage. Not even close, as the following years would prove once more. The fight over the A-10's retirement is as predictable as the annual budget cycle itself. Every year, the Air Force promises enormous savings from retiring the old fleet to fund new, modern platforms. Congress pushes back, demanding proof that the math adds up and that another airplane truly does what the Warthog does on the ground. In 2022, the service tried to retire the airplane again, and again it was blocked by Congress, which did not buy the savings argument. In 2023, Congress finally gave in partially and authorized phased retirements, letting the service begin to reduce the fleet gradually, still with a minimum floor. It looked like the beginning of the end for the airplane, but the A-10 refused to exit the stage like that. At the end of 2024, the Warthogs were still in combat in Syria, firing the cannon during the chaos of Assad's regime collapse in the north of the country. The old airplane, condemned on paper, simply did not want to stop flying. During that Syrian period, the A-10s took out vehicles, mortars, and even a T-64 tank amid the confusion of Assad's fall. In March of 2025, the airplanes were redeployed to the Middle East, again, this time against the Houthi forces in Yemen. The old airplane gained a new combat role, shooting down cheap drones in the region's skies. The fleet they should have sent to the scrapyard kept working and shooting nonstop, year after year of war. In February of 2026, Operation Epic Fury began, the American military campaign against Iran. The war was modern in every way. Stealth fighters, hypersonic missiles, drone swarms, networked sensors linked to one another. And in the middle of all that 21st century technology, a 50-year-old A-10 was back at the center of the fight. The Pentagon still wanted the airplane retired. Iran, once again, did not consult the Pentagon before sending the airplane back to combat. At 4:40 in the morning, local time, an American F-15E fighter, call sign Dude 44, was hit by an Iranian man-portable heat-seeking missile in southwestern Iran. Both crew members ejected into hostile territory. The pilot landed in one province. The weapons systems officer landed miles away in the Zagros Mountains. Both were alone behind enemy lines in an entire country hunting them, with Iranian troops combing the mountains searching for them. What came next was one of the largest combat search and rescue operations in all of American military history. The pilot was recovered first in a daytime rescue approximately 6 hours after hitting enemy soil, in a task force of 21 aircraft entering Iranian airspace under heavy fire. Among them, 10 A-10s playing the role the airplane community calls Sandy. The job of those 10 A-10s was simple to explain and brutal to execute on the ground. The Sandy role is to place yourself between the survivor on the ground and the enemy, and suppress with the cannon everything that moves until the helicopter can pull the downed airman out of there. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, described what the Warthogs did that morning in direct terms. They were engaging Iranian forces violently, at close range, to keep them away from the downed pilot. One of the 10 A-10s in the escort took heavy fire from Iranian forces below. The pilot of that A-10 stayed in the fight until the survivor was finally safe. Only then did he take the wounded jet to Kuwaiti airspace and eject. He was rescued safely. The aircraft was lost. Both crew members of the F-15E came home alive. A half-century-old airplane shot down in a war against hypersonic missiles, doing the same thing it had always done, standing between the enemy and the man on the ground, whatever it cost the pilot. The second crew member, the weapons systems officer, was even harder. Injured in the ejection, hiding in a crevice in the mountain, he evaded capture while Americans and Iranians searched for him at the same time. His rescue came later, in a second, even larger operation, with 155 aircraft involved in total. Planes landed on soft terrain and sand, and small helicopters were assembled right there in the field to pull the wounded officer out and bring him home alive. A few weeks after all of that, the annual budget came. It was expected that the Air Force would try to cut the A-10 once again, as it had done practically every year. Instead, for the first time in more than an entire decade, the service did not try to retire or deactivate the airplane. The reason was not said out loud, but it was obvious to everyone. They had just watched the Warthog do, once again, the thing nothing else in the entire American inventory can do on the ground. On April 20th, 2026, the Secretary of the Air Force, Troy Menck, announced that the A-10 will continue flying until 2030. An airplane the Pentagon had planned to send to the scrapyard years before any of that. The fleet the service had tried to kill repeatedly, decade after decade, was going to get a few more years of life, and it earned them precisely after proving, in a rescue inside Iran, why it still could not be given up, not with all the new technology in the world. The cycle repeated itself for more than 40 straight years. The first attempt to retire the A-10 was in 1984, the exact year production ended. Then came others, in 2014, in 2015, in 2022, and more. Every time, the Air Force proposed cutting the fleet. Every time, Congress prevented or limited the cut. The service spent more energy trying to retire its own airplane than many countries spend developing an entirely new fighter from scratch, from paper to the first test flight. And the strangest detail of this entire story is who the airplane's survival truly depended on. Not the generals who flew it up above in comfort. It depended on the soldiers it protected down below. It was combat veterans and Army and Marine officers testifying before Congress who held off the retirement. The A-10's existence did not depend on the service that flies it. It depended on the services it renders to those pinned down on the ground under enemy fire. The F-35, the airplane the Air Force wants in place of the Warthog, has not yet demonstrated the same sustained close air support in a heavy fire environment. The A-10's defenders in Congress and on the ground do not say the airplane should fly forever. They say you do not retire the most combat-tested aircraft in the inventory until something exists that actually does what it does. And nobody has been able to produce that replacement to this day, no matter how hard they tried. The ugliest, slowest, and most scar-covered airplane in the American inventory keeps doing what it has done since 1991. It answers the call, absorbs the hits, and survives everything. The Air Force spent 40 years trying to kill the A-10, and the ones who kept it alive were the pinned-down soldiers who owed their lives to it. Built for a war that never came, the Warthog stands ready for the other 7 wars that came in its place. Wars nobody had predicted.